welcome back to my channel. My name is Ayelet. I have a 2.5-year-old and a 10-month-old, and on this channel I share about Montessori, motherhood in general, respectful parenting, child development, sorts of things like that. So thank you so much for joining. It's been a bit since I've shared a video on here. This play video is from ages 2 to 2.5, but again, my son is now 2.5. I haven't gotten around to sharing my daughter's play video since she was 3 months old. We were moving and then traveling this summer, and we've had a lot of remodels on our house going. That has been very time consuming, and I have a house tour coming soon once we finish the last few things. But thank you so much for joining. I'm going to jump into talking about play from 24 to 30 months, so 2 to 2.5, a bit of what my son has been working on. And before I do that though, a few notes about play during this age in general. I found this video a little bit more challenging to do than some of my earlier ones because, as always, children have a diversity of interests and abilities. But I find that at this time, at the sort of 2 to 2.5 range, we have a way wider variety of interests and just, like something may work for one child and might have zero interest for another. So I found this a little more challenging to do. I'm going to talk about some of the activities we've done, some of the things he's liked, some of the things that have been from easy to more challenging what we've done, so some of that. But as I said, there might be some children who are 100% into like pretend play, for example. That's been something my son has not been super interested in until fairly recently, but he loves puzzles, for example. I know some kids are really into scissors. My son's not been super interested in that, but he's interested in a lot of other fine motor work. So those are just some things to keep in mind as I go into this of what he has been playing with in the last 6 months or so. So starting out, one thing that has been a huge favorite, and I have a video all about that, is puzzles. So at the beginning of this time period, around 2, he was doing some simple jigsaw puzzles. And since then, he has really expanded, and now he can do 48-piece puzzles and things like that. Really, there's no set limit on what he can do. He's very comfortable with jigsaw puzzles. So that's been a huge development over this time. He's also done some other puzzles, such as these nesting puzzles and these sorts of, I guess these are puzzles. They're a little bit different, but these ones were challenging for him at the beginning and are very easy at the end. In fact, so easy that, he jokes around while doing them. He's like, joking around about where they go and pretending to try to put them other places, even though he knows they don't go there. So that's just a sign that it is quite easy for him at this point. Where at the beginning of this time period, they were fairly challenging. So again, this is a wide range of ages and abilities, and a child might be somewhere else in this range of abilities for any of these puzzles, for example. Some children are not into any of these sorts of puzzles until they're 3 or even 4, so it's just something to keep in mind, that it can really vary. But for him, there was a lot of development in puzzles. He also likes some puzzles such as this 3D rocket puzzle, and he still likes some inset puzzles. For example, this world map puzzle. He's really into this world map puzzle. It's a more challenging puzzle than many inset puzzles because of just how it works together. And that is actually a classic Montessori material that he really loves, and I highly recommend if your child is into maps, which my son is. So at that age, you're going to see a lot of different abilities, as I said, but those are a few of the ones he has been interested in. And you can go and watch my puzzle video if you want more information on puzzles, just because it really goes into his development on puzzles there and what you can look for in puzzles. I don't have a lot talking about some of his more complex jigsaw puzzles because he wasn't quite doing them yet when I recorded that back over the summer. But that's basically just the same as he's continuing to do more complex jigsaw puzzles. So another thing, so he had been doing color matching for about a year. So we've been doing it for about 6 months at the beginning of this time period. But he still continues to enjoy color matching and more color sorting now and more complex types of color matching. This is also a good way to extend this is to add more complicated things like using tools, for example, the tongs on this color matching activity. He really enjoys that, and that makes it a little more challenging and add some fine motor work in as well. We've been doing like tongs and chopsticks and stuff like that throughout a lot of different activities just to add some challenge. This is a fun one. This is just a 1-to-1 correspondence into a muffin tin using tongs. However, one thing I added was a little bit of sorting. So you can see some of the little apples have little worms on them. So I drew a little worm and I put those matching in some of the muffin tin. So he would find ones that had worms to put into those ones and the others into the spots I didn't put worms in. So that made it a little bit more complex and fun. It was still pretty simple for him, but just a way for him to practice that fine motor work with the tongs. And as well, we've been doing out with chopsticks in matching activities. He still loves matching. He enjoys more complex matching, whereas at about 20 months, he was super into, and even maybe a bit before then, he was really into simple matching. Let's just say a simple picture of a farm animal. And matching that, now he's doing more complex ones, such as birds and these monuments. Monuments are a real favorite of his. He really enjoys that. And for all these things, for birds, for monuments, he's learning the names of all of them. And so it's a language activity, and he is developing his language so much from that. So that has been a really great activity for him. I make it a bit more complex at times by doing things like adding in these chopsticks. So this was fun. These are sharp chopsticks, and this is a sorting activity. A matching activity for different sea animals. So that's like a fun way to do it. And this is a lot more complex. A lot of these animals look more similar to each other or don't exactly match the picture that is on the matching thing. So it'll be a more complex picture than some of those easier matching activities he was doing last year. Again, fine motor work has been a huge focus. As I mentioned, my son is not super interested in something like scissors. He does it some, but it's not a particular interest. It is for some children, but it hasn't been for him necessarily. So we've been doing chopsticks, we've been doing tongs. He likes this little magnet worm activity where you're pulling the worms out with magnets, with this magnetic rod. And that's something that is practicing that fine motor work and that hand-eye coordination and control. So those are some things to try. So at this age, you can really continue a lot of those activities you were doing at earlier ages, as I mentioned, color matching, animal matching, or monuments, or whatever, sort of picture-to-object matching or picture-to-picture matching. That's one he's been doing a lot more of, is picture-to-picture matching. You can continue a lot of that. You can also add in more complex things, such as adding in the tongs, which is something we do a lot, is adding different ways to do the activity to make it a bit more complex, to work on that fine motor skill, those fine motor skills. Other thing is with puzzles. I mentioned some of in earlier videos, I mentioned that he was doing these simple animal 3-piece puzzles. So they would start out with we would give him just a few at a time, and now we've switched to really having the whole set all together. And that is another way to just make an activity more complex or easier depending on your child. So again, as always, practical life is really, really our thing around here. We do a lot of vacuuming. He does a lot of cooking still. He loves all sorts of things like that. He sets the table. He does water pouring. One thing that happened during this period is he went from just pouring everything. So he would pour and just pour and fill. And if it overflowed based on what was in a pitcher. But he learned during this period how to pour with control. So he'll have a larger pitcher and he's able to control and only put in the amount that he actually needs in a glass. So that's something that he learned during this period. And he's been doing pouring to the line. So I'll put a line on the glass and he pours to the line. And that just works on that control. As I mentioned again, I keep harping on the scissors because it is an activity I think of that a lot of kids really enjoy, that he hasn't as much. And that's something he also enjoys, though, a lot more if he's opening boxes or things like that. So practical life is really still the heart of our home over here. We're doing a lot of gross motor stuff too. He loves his scooter and things like that. So most of what I've talked about is more Montessori inspired things, like close-ended. Of course, I've also mentioned the gross motor, I mentioned his scooter and stuff. But in general, most of what I've spoken about is close-ended Montessori type materials, which I always get questions about. Montessori materials are close-ended. Montessori toys isn't exactly a thing, really. There are no Montessori toys, but there are Montessori aligned toys, and those will generally be close-ended. So, for example, a puzzle, there's one way to do it. Now, there tends to be a lot of confusion about this because a lot of things are labeled as Montessori because they're open-ended. Now, open-ended toys are absolutely wonderful and they belong in your Montessori home, but they're not per se Montessori. That being said, I'm going to touch a little bit on open-ended toys. During this period, you may see a lot of development towards more interest in pretend play. So my son definitely became way more interested in pretend play during this period, where he went from his pretend play being things like talking on a fake phone or something, or pretending to take pictures, simple things like that. He's gotten way more into pretend play during this period, doing things like pretending he's going through security, going onto an airplane and doing all those sorts of things, or some amount of sort of representative play, which he's not as interested in. He's interested more in just pretend play with his body, but some representative play. He loves his barn and his animals, and even though he's very much at the beginning of understanding that representative pretend play with his animals, he enjoys it and he loves playing with his barn all the time. We've also started doing more building. So those are some open-ended toys that he really loves, and that's what I had to talk about today. I could talk about more about art, for example. He loves dot stickers, he loves watercolors, he loves painting and paint sticks, things like that. But that's gonna try to keep it a little bit shorter. So I mentioned some of the ways to extend activities, some of the things he's interested in there, and a little note about open-ended play. So thank you so much for joining. I hope there was something helpful in this video. As I said, it's a little more challenging at this age to sort of give recommendations of what to play with at this age, because every child is so different, both in their skills and, more poignantly now, their interests. So children are going to have vastly different interests. So you really want to follow what your child is interested in. And I'm looking behind me and I am noticing a couple more things that I want to mention. One other thing, we have started doing a little bit of like homeschool, not really. He's 2.5. It's not, he was 2 in a few months when we started this. It's not really school. I don't like calling it school, but for lack of a better word, we've done our first introduction to some letters. I will say this is not something he is super taken to yet. He's very interested in print and he asks about it all the time, of what things say, and he tries to understand and decode it. So he is very interested, which is why I brought these out, but it's not something he does all the time yet, but it is something he's interested in. So these are sandpaper letters. These are a classic in Montessori. I am starting with lowercase. There is an argument to do both at the same time. Many will tell you to do both at the same time. Montessori generally starts with lowercase, but we are doing sounds and letter names at the same time. So we have these sandpaper letters. You introduce them, trace them, so it gives that tactile feedback. But what we've been enjoying doing with them the most is letter matching. So matching these little letters with the big letters. I guess sorting them. So that has been what he's been most interested in with the letters, and that's just something we've been doing. We also have this puzzle, so I've been trying to give him exposure to the letters since he's been showing interest in that. One other more academic sort of thing is he's been loving these for counting, and our pegs, that. And he's been learning his numbers that way, and he's been grasping sort of the idea of the one-to-one correspondence on there and understanding some of the numbers, quantities to the symbol. So this has been a great activity for him. He is very much enjoying this, a little more academic. And he's still pretty young. I would not pressure academics in any way at this age, but he has been interested in letters and numbers. And because of that, I've been introducing some of that in our little school time. One other thing I forgot, I was seeing these behind me. These dressing frames are an activity he really has taken to. We first saw these while traveling. So these ones I actually bought in South Korea, but they're very cool. This is a classic Montessori, and he's been working on buckling and unbuckling and things like that. I've been seeing his interest in buckling with his car seat and his stroller, so I thought that it'd be great to give him some more activities to try that on the shelf. So I think that's the end now. Thank you so much for joining to look at some of what's been on our shelf and what I might recommend for ages 2 to 2.5. Thank you so much for joining. Have a good one.